Harms, the leader of the Green Party in European Parliament. Ms. Harms has just came back from the eastern Ukraine, specifically from Slavyansk and Artyomovsk, and she will update us on the situation in these two cities. Пані і панове, я запрошую до слова пані Ребеку Хармс, лідера партії Зелених в Європейському парламенті, яка щойно повернулася із Східної України і розкаже про останню ситуацію, про те, що вона побачила в Слов'янську та Артемівську.
Good morning. First of all, I would like to give my deep feelings of sorrow to all families, friends, also colleagues of those people who died in this flight of Malaysian Airlines. It is, I would say, another very, very negative development for Ukraine and for Europe, for the world. Right now I have nothing to add to what Mr. Yatsenyuk said in his statement. I decided to come to Ukraine already before this happened, this attack against the plane happened. Actually, I was already traveling towards Ukraine from Amsterdam when I learned about this airplane crash in the region of Donbass. My idea why I came back again to Ukraine now was to learn a little bit more directly on the ground in the east of Ukraine, in Donbass region, about the situation of the citizens, about the ideas, the political ideas, not only of people who supported the Euromaidan, but also by people who are in a different political camp. I met in Kharkiv and in Slavyansk and Artyomovsk. I met during 2 days. I met so the governor of Kharkiv, I met the mayor of Kharkiv, I met representatives of the Communist Party, I met pro-Russian politicians, but I met also people representing citizens' committees from all over Ukraine working on lustration law and lustration rules in the regions, in all the regions of Ukraine. In Slavyansk and Donetsk, I met soldiers of the Ukrainian army. I met also soldiers of self-defense group. I met citizens of Slavyansk and I met also many citizens, active citizens who are doing nothing but assisting the army, self-defense groups or normal citizens in Lugansk, in Donetsk, in Artyomovsk and Slavyansk to have more or less a normal life or to be able to survive in this very moment. I was very, very impressed, I must say, about the commitment of many citizens to help their soldiers. I spoke to many, especially very young soldiers. What I learned is that many of the soldiers are really, in a way, ready to protect the country of Ukraine, the state of the Ukraine, the territory of Ukraine. In the same time, I saw that none of them is really wishing to go to war. And my conclusions after many meetings in the region is, especially because I'm a member of the European Parliament, I represent also in a way the European institution, European Parliament. I think the main task for the international community, especially after MH17, and that many people who died during the last days even more, I think the main task of the international community is to do everything to stop the further escalation of the conflict. My biggest fear is that, as we saw it in other conflicts in the last decades, that Ukraine is tracked, is driven into a war which they never wanted. And because of this, I very much support all ideas to close now, definitely, the border in between Russia and Ukraine. And I think it's really getting a kind of game that Mr. Putin is promising this since weeks and months and is never delivering on this. So there I see really a task, an acute task for the international community. When I talked to citizens in Kharkiv, I have also some old friends, professors from the university in Kharkiv there. When I talked to them, I understood that the tensions and the fears in Kharkiv are still very, very alerting. They tell me that each night, those citizens of Ukraine living close to the border of Russia, they hear during every night the tanks, massive movements of Russian tanks on the Russian side of the border. This creates fear, but this shows in the same time that Russia has a lot of forces there in the region and that it should be no problem if it is really wanted to close the border.
Thank you so much, Ms. Harms, for your unbiased view on what you have seen in eastern Ukraine. We have a question from Euronews.
Thank you, Sergio Cantone, Euronews. About the closing the border. Visibly Putin is not willing to do that because it is using this permeability, actually, of the border. So, have you any idea on how Ukraine could, the Ukrainian forces are trying to close the border, to impermeabilize it. But have you any idea on how the international community could help the Ukrainians in closing the border and avoiding this infiltration of, say, alien forces? Mm-hmm.
So I'm not a military expert, but I hear this demand by politicians, by Angela Merkel, by Mr. Cameron, by Mr. Hollande, also by Mr. Obama, since weeks and months. And I think they should come up with a feasible proposition how to do it and how also to convince Mr. Putin that it's now or never if he wants to avoid that the West really changes all the relations towards Russia. So far, the economic sanctions have not been applied as they have been agreed in this three-stage concept by the West. There are many contradictions organized, created by Western European leaders, especially in this concept. But if in such a situation, like after the shooting down of MH17, the European leaders and the international community is not able to achieve the closing of the border in between Russia and Ukraine, then all the sanctions must be agreed immediately. And so as far as I understand the Russian situation, already the first sanctions, which have been very limited, had already a certain impact on Russian economy.
May I have a follow-up?
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry. Excuse me, just a follow-up. What do you expect in this sense from the Wednesday Council of European Affairs Ministers in Brussels to be held in Brussels?
So more serious and more unified approach and a proposition exactly on what I said, how to close the border, whether they do it with the help of the blue helmets or not. So they have to decide what fits to this situation, but they have to do it. I was yesterday in the region, and I can only confirm that the citizens of Artyomovsk and of Slavyansk, they informed me that they are news that during the day and during the night, again, heavy weaponry and more soldiers could pass the border in between Russia and Ukraine, and this cannot continue. And it has not been Ukrainian to decide on this escalation. So the European Union, the international community, has to convince Russia to stop this at least indirect support of the self-declared separatists in Donetsk and Lugansk.
If possible, a question, Ms. Harms. Do you think, after what you have seen in the east of Ukraine, that it is still a good idea on behalf of France to sell Mistral ships to the Russian Federation, or maybe that deal should be closed and should not go forward, especially after a lot of the reaction that France is getting about this potential deal?
So the export of Mistrals is in 100% contradiction of the agreement and the ideas of the concept of sanctions which had been agreed in the European Council. I was shocked when I read 2 weeks, 3 weeks ago that several hundred Russian soldiers arrived in France to be trained for those Mistrals. I'm really convinced that it would be a threat to the EU, and to NATO, if France would export the Mistrals to Russia now. I had proposed with several colleagues in the European Parliament that NATO can take the Mistrals, and then NATO maybe must not invest more in armament of the NATO. We will continue to ask this. But in addition, so not only France is leaving the compromise of the European Union to help the democratic development in Ukraine. The contracts which have been made have been signed by Italy and by Austria with Gazprom some weeks ago. Also, the ongoing good economic relations in between my own country and Russia, or Mr. Cameron's protection of the City of London, is in conflict of a consequent line of the European Union to help Ukrainian development, not to go against Russia. This must be said again and again. It's not an idea or a strategy against citizens of Russia. It's a strategy to help civil society, a democratic movement in Ukraine, and to pave the way for a peaceful solution, a non-military solution for the conflict in eastern Ukraine.
Question.
Prushinsky, Toronto. Listen, there's two questions. One, why didn't the Ukrainian government ask United Nations to put United Nations forces on the border between Ukraine and Russia? And second, is there really a chance of getting a peaceful solution without a plebiscite in the east or whatever, some kind of way for the people there to say whatever they would like to have. Thank you.
So first citizens of Slavyansk, I met directly in the entrance of the city yesterday. I did not know them, and what they said to me was, we pray, that this will never come back, what we saw during the last weeks. I think yes, there is the necessity of political clarification also in the East on how they see themselves in Ukraine, how they want to reorganize the state of Ukraine. There are many, many discussions on so decentralization of also making more important the regions of Ukraine, but you cannot come to a good clarification about what the citizens want if you have the rule of violence. If you have people who are very often more bandits than what you might think is a separatist. And I met people who declared to me that they are happy that those bandits left the city and that they can now again use their car in the streets without fearing that somebody is stopping them to take away their car. So this is one of the nicest and less dangerous stories, but to go for a referendum in such a situation is not a good idea.
How about the United Nations forces?
So I think this is one of the propositions on the table for the heads of states and the international community. They have to decide. But I think the international community in this very moment has also to think about the lessons we have to learn from Transnistria, from Ossetia, from Abkhazia, etc., and how not to repeat the same mistakes. So there must be a clear line against this strategy to track Ukraine into a war. I see many people in Ukraine say, yes, we are ready to fight for our nation, for our country, also for keeping the territory of Ukraine together. But in the same time, I see that the decision for military escalation was not taken in Ukraine, and they are pushed or pulled into a development nobody can foresee so far. And our responsibility, I feel very much my responsibility to do really everything after MH17 also to stop this escalation.
Ms. Harms, just a question from my side. You have just stressed on the painful need on the adamant and unified EU position and strategy to stop Russia aggression. What will be your next steps as a politician coming back to European Parliament to facilitate achieving this?
So first of all, today I have some meetings with Ukrainian colleagues and representatives also of Ukrainian Parliament and government. I will also give them messages based on my experiences in the regions. Maybe they will also not like all of the messages. And then I will go home to Brussels and will prepare some talks with those who are consultant for Catherine Ashton and also for Mr. Steinmeier, who is the Foreign Affairs Minister of Germany. I know him very well. And I will ask an urgency meeting of the Committee for Foreign Affairs in Brussels during this week.
We have one more question. We just handed your device, please.
Ms. Harms,
Ms. Harms.
Problems of Ukrainian country now, the Donetsk region, and what is most effective technology to victory Ukrainian crisis, military, political, economical, ecological, social problems in Donetsk region now?
So Donetsk region had problems like all of Ukraine, a little bit different, but had problems before the so-called separatists took over power in Donetsk region. So it will be very, very difficult to come to a recovery plan if then once we will have a peaceful situation. I think it's very important for the region in the east, but also for the rest of Ukraine, that financial support, aid given by the EU or the international community is not only disappearing in the pockets of very few people, and how to help in a well-organized, fair, transparent way. This has to be clarified, and I feel very privileged that I could participate in this meeting of people working on lustration as a very, very important idea for Ukraine, all over Ukraine. They had a meeting yesterday, the day before yesterday in Kharkiv, and I will try to assist a fair aid which delivers to all of the citizens of Ukraine and not only very few.
Yes, Jürgens again. I have a question again concerning the European Union. Have you the impression that after this incident there is a serious mindset change, say, even from those part of the European Union at national level as well as at institutional level that were more or less favorable to Russia, and they are stepping down a little bit, taking another position and more critical vis-à-vis Russia that could lead to some active policy against it. I'm talking about the countries that you have mentioned, but also some part of the Brussels institution.
So I'm not sure whether all the governments, for example, Italy, Austria, and France really are favorable of Russia. I think they are favorable of good economic relations with Russia, and this for me is still a difference. We have to work on this difference. I was in the east of Ukraine, so I could not follow the media in EU countries. I saw only very, very little, very few articles and also television pieces on what they are discussing there. But what I see is that the public mood after the crash of MH17 is really very, very negative about what's going on. And I think, so the majority, at least in my country, will be very much in favor of using all non-military means to stop a further military escalation with at least indirect support by Russia in Donbass, and to stop this conflict.
But do you really think that the European public opinion would be ready to pay, because there will be an economic impact on these countries? And do you think they're really ready to pay the cost of the price of maybe a third level of sanctions for entering into this, say, peacefully into this conflict?
So I think if they can't achieve now this consequent common strategy, at least to close the border in between Russia and Ukraine, then so anyway, the price will be very high. It is already very high. Yeah, what do you say? How do you count MH17 or hundreds of people dying already in Ukraine before? Yeah, the price is already very high, and so the West is very strong economically. We can change our, for example, energy system. An European energy union based on energy savings, energy efficiency, renewable energy could be the innovation project of the European Union. Everybody knows it, but at a certain moment, maybe we have to jump on this.
Do we have one more question? We don't have any questions. Thank you so much, Ms. Harms, for updating us on all the developments, and thank you for your position and share it with your colleagues. Thanks so much.
Hi, my name is Pushenski.